Hello, hello, good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to my hour of love. My name is Maria Soul. I am the empowerment coach for the Mental Health Warriors. This is only my second show, so be nice to me, please. I'm still learning the ropes, but I'm excited to have the amazing Amy Taylor with me tonight. She's a mum, a businesswoman, and has been struggling with PMDD, which, as many of you women may know, or you may not know, you're going to learn something new about what it is and how to get through your daily chores with it, while you are struggling with that, how it affects your daily life and how you can overcome it. So she is full of some amazing ideas and info and experiences. So I'm looking forward to that. I'm just going to play a short little video and then I will bring Amy on board. Is it playing? Cool. Did that play, Amy?
Not that I can see on this end.
Hmm. Oh well, we might have to leave that until I figure out how to do that again. Adam will jump on and tell me. Right. Okay, we'll bring you back on. Amy, Amy, Amy. Here we go. Amy, welcome,
Yes.
welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, what time is it over where you are, Dal?
It's just on 11 p.m.
Because you're over at the eastern states of Australia, yeah?
That's correct, yeah.
11 p.m. Busy day
Yep.
for you too, huh?
Yeah, it has been a pretty long day. I did squeeze in a nap, but yeah, I had calls early. Oh, not calls. I was doing stuff for a client from last night early, and then I've had a couple of clients and bits and pieces, and then crashed because that's where I'm at in my cycle. So, yeah.
Yes. Now, tell us a little bit about that. PMDD. Just kind of explain what that is for those of us that are not too up on that.
Yeah, so the simplest way to explain it is PMS on steroids. So PMS is not
Wow.
actually a phase of our menstrual cycle. However, most of
Yeah.
us think that it is. Um, and for most women, it lasts for 3 or 4 days. For
Yeah.
me, it would last for 2 or 3 weeks.
Wow.
So at my worst, and to be fair, I mean, I have not been struggling with this in a long time. I still have to manage it, but struggle is not where I'm at now. But I struggled with it for decades before I was diagnosed. And I would have, so like I said, today is my drop from ovulation into the luteal phase. And in the past, I would have that drop and I would stay dropped until I got my period. So for a full 2 weeks, I would be in a low energy, depressed, miserable, highly hypercritical of myself state. So the way most women feel for that 2 or 3 days, like just before they get their period or just as they get their period, that would be a full 2.5 weeks for me. And so
Wow.
it was awful. And I can feel today's probably one of my worst days, but still one of my better days comparatively. So worst days currently, but better, like compared to 5 years ago. 5 years ago, my worst days are now better than my best days were back then. But I can feel that drop. But I also know that it'll only be 2 days. I'll have that drop and then I will rejuvenate and refresh and I'll have another really good week. And then I'll probably have another, based on today's drop, I'll probably have a fairly significant drop at the end of this cycle. But I know that
Mm,
and I can plan
mm,
for that. and I can reschedule clients and navigate that if I need to. And I'll make sure I'm not making promises that I can't follow through on so that I don't burn myself out. Because I used to really push myself and I would burn myself out on a regular basis. And that just intensified it. You get in this vicious downward spiral and loop.
Mm.
And it was awful. It These days I'm aware of it and I can bring in, so I had a nap today, tomorrow I haven't got much on. I've done all of my client delivery, so I normally aim to do most of what I need to deliver for clients in my good week, because I've been doing that for years. I make the most of that good week. I get myself set up for the rest of the month so that I can hide under the doona for a week if I need
Yeah,
to.
guilt free.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
so take us back. Like, when did this all start for you?
So for me, I believe, because it wasn't something that was diagnosed back then, but I believe I got PMDD with my first period. So from the age
Mm.
of 13, I have been on this cycle. So some people get it with the onset of menstruation. Some people get it after they have kids. Some people get it as they have a big life transition. So it's not there all the time, but they have a trigger event and it kicks in. But for me, I believe it was there from the onset. And
Mm.
my daughter is at that stage, and she is highly likely now she's going to have a much different experience because I'm aware of it. But the onset was at 13. And it wasn't until I was, I think, 32, 33, maybe a little bit older, before I was diagnosed and actually knew what it was. I had several misdiagnoses. So I was diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome, I was diagnosed with depression, I was diagnosed with anxiety. They attempted to diagnose me with bipolar disorder, but I refuted that one. It's like, that's not it. It's just, but it
Yeah.
looks like that because of the highs and the lows. So I have a really good week and I'm really quite up, and then I have the bad week. So it's often misdiagnosed. So for anyone that's sitting in that, oh my God, maybe this is me, check it out and
Mm.
find out, because so bipolar disorder will have ups and downs, but they're not cyclical. They're more
Mm.
sporadic. Mine was very regular. And fortunately, I went to a doctor and she asked the right question. She's like, well, does it happen with your period? I'm like, well, I don't know. And so I started tracking it, and it is to my cycle entirely. When we know that, we can manage it. Like, it just, understanding it allows the management. And I've been tracking. So in my calendar and my business planner, the first thing I put in is my cycle,
Mm.
because I know that that's what I need to be following. And I've worked with a beautiful coach who focuses on period coaching, and
Yeah.
that has really helped. But 5 years ago, I knew none of that. And so I was just living in hell. I knew I would get depressed for another 3 weeks, but I had no idea what to do about it. And I'd get a good week and I would then beat myself up. It's like, why can't I maintain this energy all the time? Why am I? And now I know the answers. No women can maintain that energy all the time. It's just my extremes are more extreme with the PMDD. So all women have cycles and the energy phases that
Yeah.
or menstruators have cycles that navigate through it. But for me, with the PMDD, it's far more extreme, which in a
Yeah.
lot of ways is good because it's really obvious to track my cycle. It's really clear to see the different energy shifts because they are so extreme. And then
Now that
on
you
the other
know.
side, it's hard because they are so extreme. So it's that blessing and curse muddled together.
Yes. So you must have struggled through many, many years of that before you were diagnosed, like
Yep.
just trying to get through schooling, education, and then
Yep.
your social life, your marriage, your children, all of that just
Everything.
would have been like, wow, freaking hard work, really. Hat off to you, darling. How did you like? Did you just take day by day because you had to, kind of thing, or?
Well, I think this is one of the things that draws me to being a planning coach. So there was an element of day by day, but there was also an element of I knew I'd have a good week and making the most
Mm,
of that good week. When you know you've only got 5 days a month that you're actually going to feel good, you learn to make the most of those 5 days.
yes.
So the the which is this is where the bipolar misdiagnosis kind of, because the mania that comes in, that I, because I would clean the house, I would set up all of the kids stuff, so all of that I would get done in that week, and I would plan for the following month. So I used to shop monthly in that good week. Not that I knew that that's what I was doing back then. It's still what I do now.
Yeah.
If I have to do something big, big projects are done in that, and it's nowhere near as extreme these days, but I still stack that good week with the stuff that's going to require lots of energy, with the stuff that's going to require me to go out of the house and engage with other people. And
Mm,
so the in some ways it was day by day, and in some ways it was really that pre-planning and having everything, and everything was, and still to some degree, was overly structured. My kids were color coded because the more control I had around my environment, the more I was then able to navigate the internal turmoil that would come up in those bad
yeah.
days. And
Mm,
so, yes, it was day by day, but it was also sort of the looking at that longer term and planning for, and a lot of it was unconscious. It was just, I know I'm going to feel like crap next week. And I still have that. Like, I'm still, I need to take care of this now because I may not feel good tomorrow. So if I'm having a good day, I take care of as much as I can and get as organized and as structured as I can, so that when it all goes to shit, I've got that backup. And there is still this piece of me that's highly pessimistic. It's like, this is going to fall apart. And that serves me really well now that that's not coupled with beating myself up when it does go to shit. So I used to plan for the shit and then be so critical to myself when I wasn't energetic and I wasn't um, as up to taking care of things. Whereas these days I plan for it, and then I, like you said before, it's the guilt free. I can have a nap. I can
yeah.
rest. I can, everything's taken care of. It's all good. And
Yeah.
I can just lean into that rather than the everything's taken care of and yet I should be doing better that I used to bring in, that hypercritical
I think that's
self.
something that women do anyway, isn't it? We are very critical of ourselves, especially like, if we're trying to juggle many things like, household, children, meals, washing, all of that kind of stuff. And then if we're trying to bring in a business on top of that, um, if we are struggling energy wise or emotionally or anything like that, we're just like, it's kind of like you tell ourselves that we've just got to soldier on, we've just got to keep going, just going to keep going until we actually crash. But
Yeah.
whereas what you're doing now is you are, yeah, you're really planning out your time, which is fantastic. That's something that we could all take on board anyway, you
Mm.
know? So
Yeah.
that's
So
like,
even without the extremes, it's worth just
yeah,
allowing for, because so for me, I know my mental health has obstacles that I'm going to encounter. I know my cycle's got obstacles that I'm going to encounter, but we've all got obstacles.
yeah,
Sometimes it's my kid homesick. Any parent is going to get days where their kid is homesick and underfoot and they've got to reshape what they're doing. Or there's a pandemic that kicks in and we've all got to readjust. Like, we've all got things
we're getting so good at adapting, aren't
that,
we?
yeah, we all need to have that adaptability. And so um, for many of us, it is having that external structure
Mm,
in play so that we can then have the spontaneity and cope with the chaos when it's not our own.
yes,
So when we create it, it's spontaneity. When the world creates it, it's chaos.
that's it. And we just got to learn to ride those waves. So the analogy that I use is, because shit always happens in life. And I used to look upon it as hitting a wall, and fall in a heap and, emotional heap and all that as well. But now, like the analogy that I've brought in, and that's what I share with a lot of my clients, is just, when this stuff happens, just get on your surfboard in your mind, that analogy. Just get on the surfboard and ride those waves. And when things settle down, because they always do, then you can just get out your stand up paddleboard and just, enjoy the serenity and
Yeah.
regroup and, because, and be in flow, I guess, as much as we can, be in flow rather than beat ourselves up or, other people up.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
You
Well, and
know,
a lot of mine was externally project. So when I couldn't beat
yeah,
myself up anymore, it would project out to my husband.
yeah, those are the closest to you. I'm not always the way.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of intrigued, like going back, like through your schooling and that. How did you get through your school days when you were struggling with this as well? Because you couldn't just curl up. Or did you have a lot of time off school?
No, so there's a certificate somewhere that I've still got 100% attendance through year 8 because
Yeah,
I would just push through. I would
yeah,
just and I still can. So if I've got stuff on and I need to, it's one of the biggest objections people say when I say that I plan with my cyclist. Well, what if there's an event that's not in the right fact? You do it. So I can navigate that, but it's the self-care behind the scenes, whereas I didn't have that
mm,
through high school, at least not consciously. And so I struggled. I was very depressed through most of my senior years at high school, though no one would have known. I was exceptionally critical on myself, and I don't think I knew any different. So sometimes when I look
mm,
back at who I was, I'm like, how did I live with that? But it's kind of like I have a friend who has very thick glasses, and she didn't get them until she was sort of 7 or 8. And when she started wearing them, she could see leaves on trees. So prior to that, trees were just this blob. And
wow.
so, but until she could see the leaves on the trees, she didn't know that she was missing out on anything. So I don't think I realized through those high school years or my early 20s or well into my 30s that I was missing anything. It wasn't until I started to get a glimpse of there's another way that I started to realize how bad it had been. And so
Yeah,
while my teenage years, when I look back, are fairly shit, I don't think I knew that at the time. It was just what it was.
yeah,
And it and I didn't realize that not everybody else felt like that
yeah,
because
yeah,
I just assumed that and I'm like, why are we living? And it wasn't until later, I'm like, why are we living like this? There's so many, which is why I'm such an advocate. It's like, there is another way, and we don't have to live in that hypercritical. But in my teen years, I had no reference outside of that, and I just assumed that's what living looked like.
yes.
And it's only now in hindsight that I can see how awful it must have been. But at the time, it just didn't. It was
And
just
nobody
how it
else would have
was.
known what you were going through either, because
No,
of that brave face, which we're all really good at
yeah.
doing, aren't
So
we?
the brave face, no one knew, and at that point in time, so it wasn't until 2015 that PMDD actually became a diagnosable. Like it's now in
Mm,
the. I'm pretty sure it's in the DSM-4, or it's now diagnosable. So 2010 was when they started realizing it existed, and then or started documenting that it existed. And so there was no way of knowing. I mean, 1990s was when I was going through this. 1993, no one knew it existed, and no one knew that it was going on. So no one was asking those questions. So I was sent to
yeah,
counselors, I was sent to various people, but I just didn't feel like any of them got. I was like, well, what's the point? This is just how I feel. This is who I am. And there was definitely an identity attachment. It's like you take away my depression or my this cycle, you're going to take away who I am. And that was a
mm,
big fear for a long time because as awful as the bad weeks are. My fear was always, and my period coach reminded me of this the other day, but my fear was always, if I solve my PMDD and have that manageable, what's going to happen to my creativity? What's going to happen to because I have a week of being amazing and doing amazing things. You take away the bad, you're going to take away my good. And so there was this massive fear around that. And that's not been the case at all. I now leverage my good. It's still available to me, and it's no longer as extreme, but I get 3 weeks of good and 1 week of bad now. So I'm
Yes,
still getting, and it's
beautiful.
spread out, and it's far more sustainable. And so this fear of, if you take this is who I am, and it's not who we are. Depression, any mental illness is not part of our identity, but so often we attach it to that. So I was PMDD in my mind, and that
Mm,
was who I
mm,
was and my identity, but it's not who I am. I am so much more than that. And separating myself, it's like I have PMDD and I manage PMDD,
but it doesn't define you.
but I'm not PMD. And it was the same with all of the other diagnoses. So the first shift I really made when I started working with the coach was the distinction between I have depression and I am depressed.
Yes.
Because when we take it on as an I am depressed, it becomes who we think we are. And if you strip
But
away who
quite
we are,
often, though,
we're
that
lost.
those labels are given by the medical profession.
Yeah.
And the
Yeah. So
labels,
that
I
distinction
don't do
of,
labels. They're like, oh, you're depressed, so you've got depression, so we need to give you this.
yeah. So, and the difference
And
between you are depressed and you have depression is massive in a language. So that language shift, I am not
mm-hmm,
PMDD.
mm,
I have it, and it is a chemical imbalance and one that I need to manage, but it is manageable, and
yes,
it is actually a gift,
you're not.
because
Yeah, you're not letting it hold you back, are you?
my
In a
brain
way,
is,
it's making you more determined.
and my brain is wired differently. There are
Yeah.
massive gifts. So they've done studies, and what is it that there's something we've got more of in our brains, like the neuroreceptors or something. And I'm not the scientific, but they've done studies. My brain is literally wired differently, and that's a gift, because
And
that's how I
that's
come
why
with.
you're so good at what you're doing.
As to say, it is why I'm so good at what I do. It's so when I embraced it as a gift,
Yes.
that shifted it. But again,
Yeah.
that's not who I am. It's what I have. I have weird wiring in my brain, but I'm not my weird wiring in my brain. I'm
Yes.
more than that, so much more
Yeah.
than that.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, so I think going back to your question about the teenagers, I didn't know any different.
Yeah.
And I
And so,
didn't
what
realize
age?
I was struggling.
Yeah. What age were you? So when you started having your children, had that diagnosis come through?
No,
So
no.
still,
So I had my first child at 24.
yeah.
And I'm just trying to work out. So Alexander was born 2011, and my diagnosis was the end of 2015. So he would have been 4. So my oldest would have been about 10 by that stage. So
So trying to cope
um,
with that with the little ones as well would have been
yeah, so I
another
had 4
challenge.
kids under 6.
Yeah.
And part of the benefit, so the way PMDD works is it's actually triggered. It's not triggered by our menstrual cycle. It's triggered by our ovulation. So when I was
Ah.
pregnant, it went away
Yes. Nice.
because I was no longer ovulating.
Mm.
And so I think part of the reason we had so many kids so quickly was that it actually felt good to be pregnant. And
Yeah.
my second pregnancy wasn't as smooth, but my first pregnancy, all of those symptoms went away and I felt amazing. And that's, I think, where I got this glimpse of this could be different,
Yeah.
with no awareness of what it was that had shifted, because I didn't understand about my cycles. I didn't understand that what was triggering me was the ovulation. I didn't understand any of that. But that was where I got the glimpse of, this is what happiness looks like.
Yeah.
And then I was diagnosed with postnatal depression. But what had happened? So at about 6 weeks, I plummeted energetically. At about six, when my baby was about 6 weeks old, 6 weeks postpartum. But at 6 weeks postpartum, I also got back my periods. And so it wasn't
Wow, that's
the
early, isn't it?
postpartum, it's the menstrual. And this is what I'm saying. There's
Mm.
so many misdiagnoses because people don't ask the right question. So the
Yeah.
moment I started menstruating again, I went back to my old patterns and really struggled. And now not only did I have to struggle with myself, I had this 6-week-old baby that I was trying to look
Yeah.
after. And and I lost my identity of being a nurse and working full time because I was now on maternity leave. So I'd stripped away my purpose of going out of the house. And so there was
Yeah.
that. And then coupled on top of the hormone imbalance, it was a nightmare. And it still amazes me how I got through that. So I have written that story of my first year, and I read
Oh,
that.
yes, you've written a book, haven't you?
Yeah, so I wrote the story. So it's called Insanity: Journey Through Darkness. And it's that story of that first year. And it doesn't go into any of this cycle stuff. I probably could do another book to complement it. But I read that and my heart breaks for the woman
Mm.
that I was then,
Mm.
because she was so, and I think it really was. I'd had that glimpse of life didn't have to be this way. And then I'd been dragged back into, and no
Mm.
idea how to get out of it.
Especially with little
And
ones as well.
and then yeah, it was the being at home. I started my first business when my son was 6 weeks old because I
Yeah.
just knew I couldn't be a stay-at-home mum on its own. And
Yeah.
kudos to the women that do it. If that's what you're called to do, amazing.
Yeah.
But I feel like Trudel. I don't know if you've ever read that little golden book, but it's like I was called for bigger things. And I don't think that's accurate, because I think being a stay-at-home mum and raising kids is one of the most
It's
amazing
hard work
things
as
that we
well.
can do.
Yeah. It's a
It's
massive adjustment.
but it was just too much. I couldn't.
Yeah.
And so, but again, it was that kind of time frame of hitting my cycle. I was like, this is not working. I have to do something about this. And so then we
Yeah.
had 4 kids in 6 years, and I ran a business with the 4 kids, and I kind of hid in that and navigated that the best I could. My one good month a year, I'd do my team trainings in those weeks. I'd do all of what I could in that. And then I'd just get through day by
Yeah.
day the other weeks. But there was that glimpse. I think that was the wake-up call of this isn't how it has to look.
Yeah.
And then
Yes.
add in a couple more
Can be
pregnancies. It's like,
different.
this really isn't how it has to look. There's another, I can be different. And there is a way to be happy. Because I don't think I'd realized how unhappy I was until I was happy, if that makes
Happy.
sense.
Yes.
I could
Yeah.
see the leaves on the trees, like that epiphany moment of there's something beyond this. And it was 4 or 5 years after my last pregnancy before I actually found something that really helped, and before I got the diagnosis. And that instantly changed everything. It's
Yeah.
like, oh my God, it now makes sense why
And
this
so,
is
what
working.
was it that made you make that decision that 4 kids was enough? Because knowing, the happiness that you found during your pregnancy.
I
Do you
think
know
my
what I
husband
mean?
made that decision. I
You just
don't
say, no, that's enough.
I would have gone back for another. I would have gone back for another
You can't
couple,
just keep
but
having kids.
in the 20 something years that my husband have been together, he's made 3 doctor's appointments, and one of them was for his vasectomy. The rest of them, like, I've navigated taking him and getting him checked up and making sure all of that kind of happens. But that one, he's like, no, we're done.
We're done.
And
Yeah. Yes.
I'm not sure what it was for him. So and I think that was well, how else am I going to get the happiness? And so I
Yes.
started searching
For other.
and started seeking. I didn't know that coaching existed. I didn't know
Yeah.
and period coaching like that. Just even now, I speak with
Yes.
coaches and they're like, "Oh my God, that's a thing." I'm like, "Yes, it
I
is
didn't know there was a
totally
thing
a
either.
thing."
Wow. That's
Um,
awesome.
so I work with a period coach. I still am a part of her alumni program. I was interviewed by her the other day, actually, but that was a massive transformation for me, was
Yeah.
realizing, because it means I'm not alone. And I think
Yes.
that's one of the things that people who are suffering in mental is we feel like we're alone. We feel like we're the
Mm.
only one. And it's tough. And that moment we
Yes.
realize that it's different, that loneliness. So the fact that there is a period coach tells me that I'm not the only one. And actually there's
Yes.
many. So in my world now, I've probably got about 15 period coaches that I'm connected with because I've stepped into that world. But finding someone that can help, and that was the game changer. So I'd seen counselors, I'd seen therapists, and they helped. But for me, coaching was the transformation where I got to start taking responsibility and start stepping into it. And I
Yes.
started coaching and got the diagnosis I can't remember the exact timeline. It's 7 years ago now, but it was very close. And
Yeah.
so it just started to, and I'd been seeking out personal development for a while before that. There's a couple of books that I've got that I relied on heavily. There's a couple of programs that I'd bought, and I knew that it was going to be something that came from within me that was going to be the answer. There wasn't an answer out there. It had to come from
Definitely. Yes. I
inside.
totally agree. Yeah.
And
And
so,
the
yeah, I'd spent years looking for the magic bullet for someone to fix me, but there was no magic bullet. It had to come from me. And the moment I started taking responsibility, and one of those first shifts was that difference between I am depressed and I have depression, because I didn't know
mm,
it was PMDD back then. It was just that shift. And the moment I shifted from this is who I am to this is something I deal with and I manage, that was a game changer.
yes. Definitely. And it's those labels. So for me, I was given those labels of um, PTSD, and clinical depression, and this is how your life is going to be. And so for me, I believed what I was told, and I'm sure that many of us do believe what we're told because it's like, well, they must know.
Hmm.
And so I lived by that,
Yeah, and we get
and
boxed into there's no, so
there's a put in
PMDD
that
has no
box.
cure,
Yeah,
but if I buy into there's no cure, then I stay stuck in that box. There is no cure, but there are management strategies and I can manage it
exactly.
exceptionally well.
Yeah.
And the same for things like post-traumatic stress disorder. Like, there are management strategies. They won't ever go away, but we don't have to live in that box of,
Well, they do actually go away because I've cleared mine, but I believed what I was told for 3 years, and then kind of went onto the personal development journey and working with the subconscious mind and all of that. So, um, yeah. So I think the thing is, like, not having those labels like define who you are. Like you're saying, we are not those
yeah,
labels. Which is awesome. And so, yeah, part of that is definitely going on that personal development journey, isn't it? And discovering who you are and all your awesomeness and all of that thing, and developing further.
yeah,
And yeah, life is for living.
absolutely.
So, how old are your darling children now?
So my oldest is 17. He's just got his driver's license, and that's a whole new level of parenting that we're exploring. And my youngest is 11, and then we've got 13 and 15 in the middle. It's the right
Yeah,
time of year to ask that. They sound organized at 17, 15, 13, and 11.
yeah,
It's not anywhere near that. We did two in There's 17 months between the older two, nearly a 3-year gap, and 16 months between the younger two,
yeah.
which is still 4 in 6 years and
So it's
insane.
almost all in teenage years.
Yeah, I'm about to have 4 teenagers. So my
Girls or
11-year-old's
boys
definitely
or
hit teenager. So 3 boys, 1 girl.
oh yeah,
Yeah.
thank goodness it's one girl. Imagine if you had four girls going through those
Well, I
cycles.
Well, I think with all I know about cycles, I would manage that, because I mean,
You
she
all
is
keep up
cycle
having the same.
aware. She is tracking. She is, so all of my kids know my cycle. All of my kids know the different energetic phases of the menstrual cycle. All of my
Yeah,
kids know when it's okay and to kind of demand a little bit more of me as a mum, and when I just don't have it in me to live up to that. And I mean, if they need anything, I will show up at any time. But
Yeah.
there are times where, like, if it's something optional, they can wait a week.
Yeah.
And they know. My husband has colloquially named all of the phases of my cycle and has been tracking my cycle. So he knew I had PMDD about a decade before I did, but not to know what to call it. And he'd been
Yeah.
tracking my cycle for that full decade. And he'd been paying because that was his survival. Because in my bad days, he needed to know to back off and
I was just going to
how
ask,
to
like,
navigate it.
what's the tips for the men in the life of someone who's got PMDD? Like, got any tips and
Well,
for
the
that?
first thing is to be cycle aware. So for the women, they need to become cycle aware, and for the men, become cycle aware. Know the different phases. And to me, that's not a tip just for people living with someone with PMDD. That's a tip for anyone living with anybody
Anyone?
menstruating. If you are a menstruator, know your cycle. If you are living with a menstruator, know your cycle. I cannot advocate for cycle awareness enough. Most women don't realize there are actually 5 phases of our menstrual cycle. So when I speak to women about what I do, they're like, oh, yeah, well, I feel a bit off on my period. And they think that's the cycle awareness. There are 5 phases of our cycle, and
Wow.
each of them comes with a different energetic alignment, a different level of what we can focus on, a different level of what we can eat that's going to support us. There's different.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
my coach goes through the 5 senses. So what we see, what we hear, what we taste, what we smell, what we want to touch. So I have a weighted blanket. It goes on my bed when I drop into my luteal phase. It comes off my bed when I get my period, because I need the weighted blanket through that 2 weeks, and I don't. And this is one of the things that women so often misunderstand. It's like, this habit worked for me so well last week. Why isn't it working this week? Because you're in a different cycle. You're in
Mm,
a different phase. You're in a different
true.
energetic alignment. It's
Yeah.
so 21 days to create a habit, I feel like, is bullshit. It's the 28 days. If you can navigate it for 28 days and it fits into each of those energetic phases, you've got a chance of maintaining it. But generally, we need to change up what we're doing. There is a
Yeah.
time to push ourselves hard in exercise, and there's a time to do yoga. All of that
Yeah.
can be done aligned with our phases. Sorry, I get very passionate about this. If I'm going too fast, slow me
I can
down.
see, but it's great. So it's actually a brilliant idea for women to just be taking note of their cycle and
Yep,
journaling. You know, the
yep,
energies and all of that, how they're feeling, moods. You
yes,
know,
yeah,
just to
all of that.
journal and observe would be
Yeah,
an eye opener. Yeah, for sure.
massive. And so for women who are menstruating, that awareness, but for men to have that awareness. So my
Mm.
husband has full access to my charting and my tracking, and I drink tea in alignment with my cycle. So he will ask where I'm at in my cycle so that he knows which flavor of tea to make for me. But it's a very open discussion in my house. My boys are the most cycle aware that I think any teenage boys would ever be, because they
Which
hear
is
me talk about
brilliant. What an
this.
insight for them to have, for their future.
Yeah. Yeah. So for both the women and the men, the first thing is tracking, and then working
Yeah,
out when you're at your best, and when and at your best is such poor language. So when you're going to be more active, when you're going to be more reflective, when you're going to be more imaginative, when you're going to be more connective. So I know, and I said to my husband,
yeah.
I went into my husband today, I'm like, I just need people. And he's like, yeah, it's that time of month. I'm like, yeah. And he's like, and I suck at that. Go and find other people to play with. But when I just don't need people, because I hit a point of I don't want people. Like, I'm just going to hide under the doona, and seriously, unless you are bleeding from the head, do not come near me. My husband very colloquially calls that the throw chocolate and run phase. Um, so throw chocolate and disappear.
For men, you got to have chocolate. Did you hear that? Chocolate.
Have
What else have they got
chocolate.
to have? They got to give good hugs.
Um, and so, yeah, so knowing that and bringing awareness to that, that's the first piece. And then navigating and there's a massive journey along that. So for me, I know what I can eat and when. So I know that part
Mm,
of the reason my crash today is so severe is because I've not been paying attention to my diet for the last 2 weeks. We've just started getting meals delivered, and I've been eating out of phase, and I'm paying for it. And I was
yeah,
curious to see
it's
how
good
much I
awareness,
would
isn't it?
pay for it. Um, and based on how much I'm paying for it, I think we will tweak how we do the menu plan. I'm liking having the meals delivered, and it's going to be a toss up between like the meals delivered or menu planning and navigating my cycle. So I'll have to see if I can find a way to navigate that. But I knew that I was eating out of alignment. And I'm like, how severe is that backlash going to be? And I'm curious to see how it plays out for the next 2 weeks, because the first 2 weeks of my cycle set up the second 2 weeks, and then those 2 weeks set up the next two, and there's this ripple effect.
Yeah.
So the symptoms that we're having are generally from about 2 weeks ago. So what we were eating, how much rest we gave ourselves, that's going to play out 2 weeks in our cycle. And
Yeah.
so
And
knowing
so
that as
that's
well.
self care, isn't it? It's very much self
Yes.
care. Like, for, again, for all of us to take on board self care, like giving yourself time to just chill out and rest guilt free, eating well, because it's amazing, like how what we eat and what we drink can affect our
Yeah.
energy levels, our emotional well being, our physical well being, you know. But it's so easy just to grab, when we're busy, just to grab like a snack,
Hmm.
takeaways or whatever, you know. But it's that forward planning,
Yeah. Yeah.
forward
So bringing in
planning.
the forward planning and tracking. So
Yes.
I did a solid year of tracking deeply. So I tracked mood, I tracked diet, I tracked energy, I tracked this might be too far, but I tracked like cervical mucus, I tracked the height of my cervix, massive detailed tracking to find out my cycle. And if I eat this food here, what's the impact of that on other parts of my cycle? And that is always the first piece, is to do that deep dive tracking. And again,
Mm.
for someone with PMDD, it's essential, but I'm seeing more and more with the clients that I work with that people without PMDD that are just menstruating can get massive impact from that. And then it can become an easy
Yes.
conversation with partners. So
Yeah.
men being open to those conversations. And so my husband helped me with my tracking and gave me feedback, because we don't always know how we're coming across to others unless they give us the
That's so
feedback.
true.
So
Yeah.
it's like, I felt like I had a really good week. And he'd look at me and go, do you? So while I felt the impact on him was not necessarily the same. So just getting that feedback and having those open conversations.
Is that like the moods that you're referring to, like the anger outbursts and things like that?
Yeah, so both moods and
Does he?
energy.
Mm.
He was able to give me
No,
some.
I can feel another book coming on, darling. You need
Oh,
to get
there's
that
about
next book out.
20.
You know, and from a male's perspective too. You know, it'll be like really interesting.
Yeah, so there is a chapter in the book that I wrote where I put myself into. So it's written as a story, and so Monique is married to Ferdinand, who are our pseudonym characters. But there is a chapter through Ferdinand's eyes, because I think getting that perspective
Yeah,
is
yeah,
really
yeah.
important. And I would love for my husband to do more in this space, because I think there's so much value he can bring. It's not his calling, it's not his
Yeah.
passion, uh,
Mm.
but there is so much that he could bring to life in what it is like to live with someone with PMDD. I think there's a book in. I
Mm.
think there's probably several books in him that could be shared, because
Maybe
he
you
has
just
so many more
need to like
insights.
record the conversation, and then
Yeah,
make a book from that, from his perspective. You know, from a
we're
male's
working on
perspective.
it.
So apart from all of that, you've got animals as well, yeah?
We've got 5 chickens. And we're down to one cat. So at our peak, we had 7 cats, but we're down to one cat now.
Wow. Did anyone call you the crazy cat lady?
They did, and certainly, yeah. And the IKEA shelves behind me. There's a picture of one of them on a meme that comes up every now, and there's a cat in every box, and I'm like, well, until I've got 12, I really can't be the crazy cat lady. So yeah, so the
Oh,
sorting, we've got some photos of our cats because they quite like those boxes. They
yeah, they're
cats like
perfect,
that,
aren't they?
don't
Perfect size.
they? They are. They're the perfect size for the cats to kind of hide in and swim
Yeah.
in. So yeah, so yes, I did get called the crazy cat lady. All of the cats came before the children, and then
Ah, yeah,
so we collected cats before we had kids.
yeah. So are you in Sydney or where are you?
We're a couple of hours out of Sydney, so we live in a town called Lithgow, which is about 2.5 or 3 hours, depending how you drive, out of
Yeah,
Sydney, over the
yeah.
Blue Mountains. And yeah, it's a
Mm,
beautiful neck of the woods. It's sort of right on that cusp of country living, with still
yeah,
being close enough to Sydney to kind of access resources. We're the end of the train line. In essence, there's now one train that goes out a day beyond us, but I can get on a train and I can go to Sydney on the train, which makes Sydney
yeah.
quite accessible.
Much
And
easier.
so,
I've been to
yes,
Sydney and there's no way I would drive into Sydney. Oh
I
God.
did years of driving in the city before we moved out here. But yeah, so we live in country living. It's just beautiful. I love where we live.
Yeah. Nice, nice. And I read on your bio too that you did stand-up comedy. Tell me
I
about
did.
that.
I did.
Have you got some
So,
jokes?
yeah, not on demand. It was definitely, so I didn't do stand-up comedy because I'm funny. I did stand-up comedy because I really, and I still to some degree hold on to. But one of the beliefs that I found that had been embedded from my childhood was, you do realize you're not funny, don't you? Like, I've had that said to me so many times, and I wanted to challenge it. And my worst nightmare came true on stage. So I told what I thought was the funniest joke. And I now don't tell it because I've reached the point of, well, I think it's funny, but I don't have to share it with others. But
Yeah.
I I shared that joke and got dead silence back from the audience.
Oh,
And that was my worst nightmare. My worst nightmare come true, and I navigated it beautifully. So the resilience that I discovered in myself and my ability to shift gears, and so the next thing I said actually drew the audience back in because I was vulnerable and I allowed myself to really open up. And so that it was completely transformational. But it wasn't done because I
what
think
was
I'm
the next
funny.
thing you said?
Well, I
Can you
can't even
remember?
remember the language around it now.
Uh,
It's on my Facebook. So anyone wanting to stalk it, it's about 5 years ago. It must be about to come up again. So I
yes,
reshare
yes.
it every year, just as a because I can. It only went for about 5 minutes, and I was literally dry retching before I walked onto stage. I was so out of my comfort zone. I remember walking up, and I wasn't suicidal. So anyone listening to this, please don't mishear this. I wasn't suicidal, but I was so terrified that I was looking at the cars coming down the road. I'm like, if I stepped in front of one of those cars, I wouldn't have to go and do this. I didn't want to
Mm,
kill myself, but I just
mm.
was so terrified. And those thoughts are normal. The following through on them is not ideal,
Yeah,
obviously,
you
but
didn't follow through, so that's
having
good.
that thought of, I need out of this. This is, and I'm just like, it's okay. I've got this. And I had friends on speed dial that I spoke to because it was a 5-day course that culminated in the live to a paid audience, not just any audience. It was to a paid audience. I don't do things by halves. Um, but I do. I remember walking up and I'm just like, I just want out of this, and that thought process. And I think we need to normalize those thoughts. Those thoughts are not the problem. What we do with those
What
thoughts,
you
so we
do
don't
with
want to
them.
follow through, we don't want to act on it, but we also don't want to become overly critical. Why are you
Mm,
thinking like that? Like the moment we judge,
mm,
the thought popped up, but I was then kind and compassionate. It's like, yes, you want to get out of this, and no, you're not getting out of this, and keep walking up the hill. And I showed up, and it was a beautiful moment. And the feedback I got afterwards, so there was a comedian that had been doing it. She was the headliner that was kind of there to draw people. When you're getting people to pay, you need someone that's actually been doing this a while and is worth paying
Yeah.
for. And she'd been doing it for 10 years. She said it took her about 7 or 8 years to get to the point where she could have a joke fall flat and own it the way that I did. And the guy
So
that
you just
was
went straight off and did it.
the reason I was able to do that was all the personal development work that I'd done beforehand. I've been doing speaking training. I've been public speaking since I was 10. So
Yeah.
the public speaking piece of it was easy for me to navigate. It was the bringing the comedy and bringing the humor. And it definitely lightened me up a lot. So while I
Yeah.
don't go to the extreme of doing comedy anymore, I'm far more playful. I'm far more engaging. I'm far more human and personable in conversations than I ever was before I did it. And so, yeah, it was an amazing gift. It was an amazing experience. And it was purely just to tap into those parts of myself that had been denied, not necessarily to hold on to them, but just to demonstrate that I could. And
Exactly. Yes. Just stretching out of your comfort zones is massive, isn't it? I can remember the first time I did that was it was almost like I went through my midlife crisis in my 30s, and one of my challenges was to do a body sculpting competition.
yep,
Completely, completely opposite to, like, I had just started at the gym, and my body was adapting quite quickly, and so people were asking me, was I training to compete, and I had no
yep.
idea what they were talking about. It wasn't even in my realm of information. So, but I got curious from that, and then I'm like, why not? Let's just challenge myself. So I did the training for it, and
Yep.
but that's totally different from actually going on stage, isn't it? When you're going out on stage, and hey, so for me, I was wearing bugger all, you know. So here I am, and I didn't find out till afterwards that it was actually like a international competition, bodybuilding competition in Auckland in New Zealand. So I didn't realize how big it was, you
Yep.
know, and it wasn't till afterwards. But that first time of stepping out on stage wearing a bugger all and doing your little like routine, I was,
Those moments
oh
of
my
building
gosh,
resilience are amazing.
yeah,
And I think when we're trapped in the stigmas around mental illness and the other crap, it's hard to do that. But it's
it's
those
courage building.
moments.
Mm,
Yeah, it's those moments. So stand-up comedy was one of the big ones, but there's been a lot of little ones that built up to that. So
yeah,
the building up to that slowly. One of the ones before that I did was walking through Melbourne dressed in full jester garb,
yeah,
and just not giving a fuck about what people thought, which is a massive shift. So a lot of people that are stuck in mental illness, it's because they're worrying about what other people are thinking, and so little moments. And again, the jester one is probably a big one. It started earlier than that, so they were sort of at the 3-year mark of my personal development.
mm,
But just those little moments, and those little moments of building resilience and building back up
exactly.
self-trust.
Yes,
Because when we've let ourselves down so often, it's hard to trust ourselves, and it's the tiniest things that make a difference. And
yes,
for me, the first turning point was drinking my cup of tea hot, which
yes,
sounds so insignificant these days, but it was so big. I had 4 kids under 6. I think they were a little bit older, but the 4 kids under 8, for me to take the time out for myself and drink an entire cup of tea while it was still hot. Alexander at 4, so he home preschooled his last year before he went to school, and he would frequently say, "It's all right, mummy, I zap it." And he would put my tea in the microwave to reheat it for me. Now, for him to have picked up that pattern tells you how
Yeah.
infrequently I managed to drink a cup of tea hot. So that was one of the very first things I did, was just take 5 minutes for myself
Yes.
and drink the cup
Guilt
of tea
free.
hot.
Exactly.
And it's the little things. So
Mm.
often, so the stand-up comedy sounds amazing. The going skydiving sound like they're both really big, impactful, but it wasn't them that made the difference. It was drinking my cup of tea hot, making the commitment to do the dishes before I went to bed. The littlest of things were the biggest of things.
Yes. And giving yourself permission to do what it is that you desire,
Yeah.
especially as a mum, again, give
Yeah, to
yourself
take
permission.
5 minutes out for myself to
Mm.
and to say to my kids, I'm drinking my cup of tea.
Mm.
You're not bleeding
Yeah.
from the head. Leave me alone. And
Yeah.
now, I
Yeah.
mean, I do webinars. And people were amazed. But so I started my coaching business from home with
Yeah.
Alexander home preschooled and 3 other kids. And I did a bunch of sessions with the 4 kids. So my January, after I started my coach training, I did 42 hours of coaching
Yeah.
with 4 children home on school holidays,
Wow.
because I'd built the muscle for myself to take time out for me. And obviously coaching isn't time for me, it's time for the clients. But I built them, and I built the muscle in my kids.
Yes.
And so I would set them up
They
and make
know.
sure
Yeah.
they were taken care of. And I would wander around and I would check in with all 4 of them. Do you need anything before I go on this? So the ritual was, coaches talk about rituals of like, what do you do before sessions? I'm like, my ritual was wander around and ask my kids, what do they need? Make sure they were fed and watered and hugged, and so that they wouldn't come and interrupt me. So I filled their little cups, and they had learned that if they let me fill my cup, they get a better mum. Mum is
Exactly.
way happier, and mum is way
Yeah.
more likely to play with us if she gets. So I did that. And 42 hours sounds like a reasonable amount, but it was 2 or 3 hours a day, and I did a ton of things with my kids those school, and I did more with my kids those school holidays, because I was deliberately giving them quality attention instead of just the
Yeah.
quantity attention.
Yeah.
But it
Oh, that's
started
awesome.
with 5 minutes to drink my cup of tea, and training my kids that it's okay for mum to take 5 minutes to
Yeah.
drink a cup of tea.
Just looking at the chats here. Pauline Pauline Hazel, she just says it's really windy in England. What is it's winter over there? Is it?
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it must. And yeah, I was speaking to someone
Okay.
in the US. They'd got 18 inches of snow last night. I'm like, that's a lot of snow.
Christy Wilson says that's awesome feedback. I'm not sure which feedback you're talking about, Dal. But thank you. And she also says the daily things make a difference. They really do, just those
They
little
do.
daily things. Like, how do you start your day? What's your first thought when you wake up? That's always a good one, isn't it?
Makes a massive difference.
Because your first thought when you wake up can kind of set the tone.
Yep.
So, yeah, feedback from the comedian. Oh, yeah,
Yes.
that's good. And one more little thing just before we close up
Mm.
as well is like the Rubik's Cube. Have you got it with you?
I do. I do. I don't know how I'll go. Like I said to you before, I'm a little bit out of practice. I did all right
So,
with
what
it
was your
earlier.
quickest time? Because hang on, I've got a stopwatch here.
My quickest time, I think, was 1:32, which to me I'm really impressed with. And then I talked to other people and they're
Mm,
like 17 seconds. The record, I think, is like
what?
4.3 seconds. I know, it's
I could
ridiculous.
not even do. I just
I'm
don't even
happy
have the
with my
patience.
under 2 minutes.
Let's go. You ready to have a go?
All
I
right,
got
so
to
to
start.
shuffle,
Ready?
I'll just show that
Yeah.
and it is
Okay.
genuinely shuffled. I'm happy to shuffle it with my eyes closed and play so that you know that I'm not just doing it. All right,
Okay.
we're
You
good?
ready? Yep.
Yep.
Go.
I want to make sure I keep it. I don't know how I'm going to do keeping it in camera. Hang on. There we go. All right. I don't know how I'm going to do under pressure with it. That's a whole new dimension.
This you haven't got the tick, 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 tick.
I
The
haven't got
clock
the
is
tick.
ticking.
That's right. Beautiful Christy is one of the clients that I took Rubik's Cubes to. So I actually get my client, well, not so much these days, but I have actually had my clients do them because it's a great way to uncover a bunch of our unconscious patterns that we bring to life and our relationship with structure and planning.
Yeah.
Because it's actually, so solving the Rubik's Cube looks fairly magical, but when you know how, it is simply 7 algorithms that you follow. And so all I'm doing is following the algorithms.
Christy
I'd love
says
to know
it's
what
like
Christy's saying in the
when
chat.
she's saying it's like when someone is watching you type and you can't remember where the keys are. So, yeah.
Yeah, we had fun. The group mentoring session where I tried to teach it was definitely one of my other defining moments of working out how inept I can be as a coach. Now I've stuffed it up. Hang on. All right, come back, Amy. What have you done? So, that one, that one, that one, that one, that one, that one. All right. So a lot of what I'm relying on is muscle memory.
Yeah. That's pretty amazing, the old muscle memory.
Yeah, so when
Brains are
I set
amazing.
out to learn the Rubik's Cube, it was my lockdown project. I bought 7. So I actually have 7 Rubik's Cubes in the house. And I just kept doing the same step to build up the muscle memory.
Yeah.
And did it on repeat. All right, that one's happy. My clients thought it was really weird that each of the cubes got to be happy or unhappy.
So and that's the thing, is we do need to have fun in our life, you know. We can get too serious, too caught up in everything else, and it's just remembering to be playful and have fun in whatever it is that you're doing.
So that's done.
Done?
And I reckon that was probably about the 3-minute mark, probably.
No, 2:43.99.
That's not too bad.
Well done. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, but it literally, it was an exercise in building up habits and routines and learning structure, which is why I take it to my clients, because but back to the how we do the little things is how we do everything. How someone approaches the Rubik's Cube, particularly for my business clients, how someone approaches solving the Rubik's Cube and following the strategies to solve the Rubik's Cube is how they will approach the strategies for business. Yeah. And so when we can uncover the unconscious patterns that are happening with the Rubik's Cube, it just brings it to life. But it was also something, I find it very therapeutic. Now that I know how to do it, I found it very fucking frustrating in the learning how to do it. But it is literally, I don't know where my cheat sheet is, but I literally have the 7 algorithms written out on a cheat sheet, and you memorize the algorithms, and it's actually really very simple when you know
that
how.
With me? Can you share that with me? I'll go and get a Rubik's Cube.
Google solve the
challenge
Rubik's
has been
Cube.
set.
There's 1,000 different ones on YouTube and I just went with the top one. How do I solve the Rubik's Cube? And it's got the step-by-step algorithms. I have an electronic one somewhere as well that tells you how to, like, there's an app on the phone that you can learn to do it through. But I found that one more frustrating. But once you've memorized the 7 algorithms, and I find I have to go into muscle memory. If I think about it, I fuck it up these days. But if I just allow, because I did 7 for each of the algorithms. So I do the first step, and then I do the second step across 7 Rubik's Cubes. It just built the muscle, and we can do that in any area of our life.
That's so true. Well, thank you so much for coming on. Our time is up, so just to be aware of that. And I figured out where that video clip is now that I should have done before. So awesome, awesome. Thank you so much, darling. I'll let you
Thank
go
you.
to
This was so
sleep
much
now.
fun. Yeah,
It
I'm
was
gonna go to
good,
bed.
hey. And thank you, Christy, for anyone and anyone else that tunes in and watches the replay later on. This will be in the YouTube and Mental Health Warriors Facebook page as well. So love
Beautiful.
any feedback from anybody.
Yes.
And oh, so that's what I was meant to play at the beginning, but then we got it there.
We
So
got
yes,
there in the end.
ending the stigma around mental illness. You know, it's the more we talk about it, the more we realize how much there is out there. And,
Yeah.
you know, there's some amazing support out there as well. There's always, you know, the mental health warriors that we're all here to reach out to as well. Um, and yeah, just awesome. Christy, thank you. Glad I caught the end. You'll have to watch the replay, Christy, for the rest of it. Thanks for jumping on though, darling. Good to see you. Yeah, so thanks, Amy. I'll let you go off and have a nice, peaceful sleep now.
Beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care, everybody. See ya.